Okay, Bamidbar, in the desert. Ironically, this week's Parsha is all about counting and figuring out who sits where and all of those kinds of things. But the Parsha and the whole book is called In the Desert. I guess it makes sense. We're spending a lot of time in the desert here. But in a way, it felt like almost like in contrast, we have, Shmot, we call after the names, and that's how it starts off. Bamidbar seems to be setting us up for some kind of prioritization around the context of what this is. And for me, Bamidbar, it's also the start of the 40 years of the wandering. We haven't decided they're wandering just yet, but we will very soon. There's also like a connection with our state as the wandering Jew. And in a way, I think the Parsha is giving us a lot of tools to help navigate that place of not knowing, of ambiguity, of wandering, of maybe lacking some kind of clarity. And it goes through a few different, key topics here. It does accounting at the beginning, and it does this for all of the 11 tribes, counting all military-aged men. Then it counts the Levites, counts them from a different age. It says that they become holy and they start to get counted from 1 month old. And then it talks a little bit about the layout of the camp. They're going to stand here, they're going to stand here, we're going to travel this way, we're going to be in front. And I think each one of these things, in a way, gives us some guidance on how to handle this state of ambiguity that we are, the midbar that we navigate. So the Parsha starts off with a counting of all the people, and the first logical way to understand that is that it's accounting for war. It's accounting for going to enter the land. We need to know who is going to be Yotzei Tzava, who's going to be ready for military, who's going to be the right age. Let's do a census and figure out who's the right person. But interestingly, a lot of the Mefarshim bring down that this counting is an act of love. Hashem counted the nation many times, and this time he counts them in a different way. Last time it was with a shekel, it was after the cheta egel. This time they call it a count of love. And why do they call it that? Because of the language of lasu et rosh. So somebody should raise their head. And what's interesting about this is the fact that it recognizes that counting is normally something that smooths everyone into a number. You become one of a whole. But the goal of this counting is in a way to give people some understanding of their own uniqueness in the context of that whole. And I think even more so, the language that is used to describe how a person is counted has so many steps of lineage that it connects that individual to their context, but still calls them out as something individually. So we have this term of rosh, the raising of their head, but a language that it uses Kol adas b'nei Yisrael lemishpachotam leveit avotam b'mispar shemot kol zachar legilgulotam. So we have here a direct connection between an individual, a gilgul, a shem, an individual person, all the way back from there to their father, to the house that they're from, the family that they come from. In some places it talks about, the shvatim, the different lineages. So there's this way of understanding how a person fits into the context of the counting. Not just a number of people, 600,000, whatever the number was, but a person connected as an individual through a lineage to the broader whole. And I think, today's day and age, one of the things that we have some kind of solace on is when we think about going into the land, Yishuv, going back to Eretz Yisrael or whatever it is. I had a long argument with somebody yesterday about, we won't get into all the details, but, every Instagram argument that you hear against us being there, I heard yesterday. And I took some solace in being able to sit and say, I want to go visit Hebron, the place of my grandparents. And I want to go visit, all the other places that I know of from my lineage. And I think in a way, this is an early guidance of how to think about that. They bring down, there's different kinds of ways of how they wrote the shtar for shame. How did they write down that a person was actually in existence? There were different kinds of proofs that they brought. So it seems like maybe this is one of the first ones. When you're in the Midbar, when you're in Gullus and you're not in there, you can take solace in knowing how you connect back to to the shoresh, and maybe that's a guidance of love there in some way. And what's interesting is right after this counting, we'll go back to the Levites afterwards in just a second, but right after this counting, it brings down the story of Moshe and Aaron, and it brings down the who are the sons of Aaron. It brings down Nadav and Abihu, and I mean it says also the Elazar and Itamar also, but it brings down this immediate lineage of Aaron's sons. I think what's interesting about this too is the fact that even though they sin, even though they're out in the Midbar, even though they're not there to stand with them, we still count them as part of lineage. That's how important it is for us to see this continuity. The next thing that the Parsha talks about is how we lay the camp out. Okay, so we've got lineage. Now we have this layout. We have some people go at the front, some people go at the left, and what's interesting about this is the way that it describes them. They go in groups of 3. Each one has a leader shevet. They have all kinds of degalim and otot that are symbols that people can recognize who's who. It's fascinating to see the flags. You can go to the back. The colored section of the Chumash has got some good pictures too. But what's interesting is something I'm not really sure how to explain. They describe the different directions that they stand in. They have north is north at Tzafon, east is east, it's Mizrach, but then west is Yama, which is the sea, and south is Taimana. And you could continue to use languages. I don't know why they choose these different places that are nearby to look at, but it seems like they were set up in this way so they covered the key different directions they could be in. Again, question, was it front and back? So if they traveled and the wandering Jew was going south, did they swap around? I don't really know for sure. It's something maybe we can explore another time, or if you have any ideas, I'm open to them. But what is clear is that everyone had sort of a role in their position. The Levites were closest to the Mishkan. The Kohanim were in the Mishkan. They had a distance that they could be when they were there. And I think this idea of the roles that we have is also somewhat helpful here. It connects with the next part of the Parsha also, which is the story of the Bechor. Twice in this week's Parsha, it talks about the Bechor as the people who were originally chosen by God, and then they passed on their role to the Levites. As a Bechor, I still feel lost. I'm like, well, what could have been? Maybe I would have been called up earlier in the Aliyahs. So there's like a big identity crisis that I have every time. No, I have nothing against the Levites. I support you all. But there is something about this pidyon that happens, this transfer that happens, that's challenging. A lot of the Kabbalists bring down that there is a certain kind of a das that a Bechor has, whether it's because they bring, create the idea of a parent or whatever it is. There's different ways to understand this, but there's something about this that a firstborn has. And in a way, what you see is that the Parsha recognizes that they started off with some kind of a role. And I can only imagine what a family household would have been like if the eldest son or whatever was was sent off to do holy service and came back a couple of months later. Incorrigible. I cannot. I mean, it's hard enough to deal with me as it is, but that would have been a different fiasco. But I think what's interesting about this is that what? Annoy. Yeah. I run away. I come back holier than thou. But there's clearly a challenge with this. And I think what's interesting is maybe something that we can learn about what happened and what went wrong there around the zealotry. The Parsha brings down a couple of different examples of this. It brings down the Bechor, and it says that they needed to have a pikadon. It brings down Dafka, like we said, the story of Nadav and Abihu, that they were zealous, they were overzealous, and they were told, no, that's not your place. There's a number of different places here where we see that we kind of all have our roles. And the requirement to stay, not necessarily in your lane, but the layout of the Mishkan, the layout of us as Klal Yisrael means that we're individuals, we have our roles, and that's the way that we can navigate this world in the best way. So maybe we have a challenge of knowing where we should be in the Midbar. The Parsha gives us a lot of guidance on how to handle that. And even more so at the end, it talks about the Levites and what their responsibilities are. Kahat is the only one in this week's Parsha. We'll talk about Gershon and Merari, the other two families in next week's Parsha. But Kahat has a responsibility to carry the holiest of the holy Kalim in the Mishkan. And the way that the Parsha writes down their responsibility, it describes even that they had to tell some of these Kohanim, not Kohanim, the Leviim, to carry the Aron. The Aron carried itself, but because they were afraid, the way that it writes it, it says that the Kohanim had a responsibility to cover these Kalim so they wouldn't touch them and see them, and a responsibility to make sure that the Kahat Levites were holy was on the Kohanim. So we have this handoff that, I would think is an amazing honor to carry this thing. Kahat is afraid. They don't want to do this, and the responsibility to make sure that they stay pure and properly covered so they don't see them goes to the Kohanim. And maybe the last part of this is that when we look at this idea of having everyone be in their role and be comfortable in the place that they are, we see that the layout ends up being a mirror of Shamayim and Aretz. It's a connection, almost a portal between heaven and earth. I can't remember exactly the language of the Zohar. I saw it somewhere that it says that the on high is like the below, and there's this mirror that you see where the four directions become the four malachim, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael. They become also part of the four of key sphirot of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, and Malchut, also connecting with different directions. When we think about the sphirot, there's a larger number of 12, which also corresponds to the Shvatim. Kisei HaKavod becomes Mishkan. And I think maybe the way to think about this is that we are very much a mirror of the holiness from on high when we can be comfortable in our roles and find that we're in the Midbar, we are a part of a multitude. We all have our place and our important own place to make a difference. And when we're in the right place, that's when the portal mirrors between Shamayim and Aretz, and we're able to bring down the right things from God and navigate the Midbar in the right way. Azoi.